It was the first autumn I'd be spending with Grandma since I was a kid. Life had gotten in the way: school, sports, my parents' divorce. But this year, Mom insisted I visit her. "She's been lonely, Danny," Mom said, handing me the bus ticket. "It'll mean the world to her." So, that's how I found myself staring out the fogged-up bus window as it rumbled down the desolate country road. Grandma's house was out in the sticks, nestled between sprawling woods and a dried-up lake. Picturesque, sure, but it always felt isolated. The kind of place where your cell phone was nothing more than a paperweight. I stepped off the bus, my breath curling in the crisp air. The sun was already setting, casting the landscape in long, creeping shadows. Grandma's house loomed at the end of a gravel driveway, its old gables covered in creeping ivy. A warm light glowed from the kitchen window, and I felt a little pang of guilt for not visiting sooner. It looked like something out of a pastoral painting, but the silence out here, it always felt too quiet. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Grandma," I called, my voice echoing faintly. The door creaked open. Inside, the house was eerily still. The faint smell of pine and something faintly metallic hung in the air. I stepped into the living room, shrugging off my coat. Her knitting sat on the arm of her favorite chair, half finished, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. But there was no sign of her. "Grandma, it's Danny," I called again, my voice wavering slightly. Nothing. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, even peeked into her bedroom. That's when I saw her. She was lying on the bed, her body perfectly still, hands folded over her stomach. For a moment, I thought she was just napping, but her skin, it was pale, too pale. "Grandma," I whispered, my heart pounding as I approached. Her eyes were closed, her face oddly serene. But there was no mistaking it. She wasn't breathing. My legs buckled, and I had to steady myself on the edge of the bed. She was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, the room spinning around me. My mind reeled. She'd been fine, hadn't she? Mom had spoken to her just last week. She'd sounded excited about my visit, even planned to bake my favorite cookies. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to dial Mom. No signal. Of course. Out here, the woods might as well have been a fortress against the modern world. I didn't know what else to do, so I called the local sheriff from Grandma's old landline. Sheriff Blake answered with a deep, gravelly voice. "I'm so sorry, son," he said after I stammered through my explanation. "Sounds like it might have been natural causes, but I'll come by in the morning to confirm things and handle the arrangements." The morning? The thought of staying in this house overnight made my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? It was late, freezing, and I didn't even know where the nearest neighbor lived. I covered Grandma with a blanket, muttering an awkward apology as I did. It felt strange, invasive even, but I couldn't bear to leave her just lying there. Afterward, I shuffled into the living room and sank onto the couch, pulling my coat tight around me. The house was freezing now, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The hours dragged on. Every creak of the old house made me jump. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I turned on the TV for some noise, but even that felt off. The signal was patchy, the screen flickering between static and half-formed images. Then I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound. It came from the direction of Grandma's bedroom. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The rational part of me screamed, "It's nothing. Old houses make noises. It's probably just the wind." But another part of me, the part that was still that scared little kid who used to get nightmares after visiting this house, wasn't so sure. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The noise stopped. I stood there, staring down the dark hallway, every nerve in my body on edge. My feet felt rooted to the spot, but finally, I forced myself to move. Step by step, I approached the bedroom, peeked in. The bed was empty. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the empty bed. The blanket I draped over Grandma lay crumpled, as though she had simply gotten up and walked away. That was impossible. She's dead. You know she's dead. But my mind couldn't reconcile what my eyes were seeing. "Grandma," I whispered, half expecting her to scold me for sneaking up on her. Nothing. Just the heavy silence of the room and the faint creak of the wind against the house. I stepped inside, my legs shaky. The room was exactly as it had been earlier. The worn rug by the bed, the collection of porcelain figurines on her dresser, the faint smell of lavender from her hand lotion. But now the blanket wasn't the only thing out of place. The wardrobe door was slightly ajar, the edge of a coat sleeve peeking out like a hand reaching for me. I stood frozen, staring at the wardrobe. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Part of me wanted to shut the door, bolt back to the couch, and pretend none of this was happening. But something drew me closer, some mix of fear and morbid curiosity. I reached for the wardrobe door and pulled it open in one swift motion. Empty. Just a few of Grandma's neatly hung dresses swaying faintly, their soft floral prints mocking me with their normalcy. I let out a shaky breath, forcing a nervous laugh. "Get it together, Danny," I muttered, closing the door. As I turned to leave, something stopped me dead in my tracks. A faint noise, so soft I almost missed it. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. I whipped around, my heart lurching. The window was closed, frost creeping along the edges of the glass. Beyond it, nothing but darkness and the skeletal outlines of trees swaying in the wind. I took a hesitant step closer, peering out. The snow outside was pristine, untouched. And then I saw it. A faint, pale outline of a face reflected in the window. But it wasn't mine. It was behind me, my body locked up. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The reflection in the glass was faint, almost distorted, but I could see the outline clearly enough. Sunken eyes, gaunt cheeks, hair that hung in thin, wispy strands, and the mouth, twisted into the faintest hint of a smile. "Danny!" The voice was a breath, soft and cold, but it wasn't coming from the window. It was behind me, right behind me. I spun around, my back slamming into the wall. But there was nothing there, just the empty bedroom cast in shadow. The air felt wrong, heavy with a suffocating stillness that made every hair on my body stand on end. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was exhaustion, the shock of finding Grandma. Maybe I was seeing things. That's all it is, I told myself. You're just tired. But then the smell hit me. That faint metallic tang from earlier, stronger now, sharp and invasive. It clung to the air like an invisible fog. My eyes watered as I coughed, covering my mouth. It was coming from the living room. Reluctantly, I left the bedroom, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the quiet house. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, dimly lit by the flickering TV, my coat still draped over the armrest of the couch. But the smell, it was overwhelming here, coppery, wet, and then I saw it, a trail of dark, glistening stains on the hardwood floor, leading from the couch to the hallway. They looked like footprints, bare feet, small and delicate, each one perfectly formed as though dipped in ink. They hadn't been there before. I followed them, slowly, carefully. My stomach churned with every step, but something compelled me forward. The footprints led down the hallway, past the bedroom, and stopped at the attic door. The pull cord dangled, swaying faintly as if someone had just tugged on it. "Grandma!" I whispered, my voice cracking. No answer. The attic door creaked open before I could touch it, revealing the narrow staircase leading up into darkness. I stared into the void, my pulse roaring in my ears. Something moved up there, a soft shuffle, barely audible. Then came the whisper, "Danny, come up here." Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to run out of the house and keep running until I was miles away. But that voice, soft, familiar, laced with something unnatural, seemed to anchor me in place. My grandmother's voice, but not quite, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Danny?" It called again, dragging my name out like a plea. My hand trembled as I reached for the railing. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, each step echoing louder than the last. The smell of copper grew stronger, mixing with the attic's usual scent of dust and dry wood. My flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness above. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. At the top of the stairs, the attic stretched out before me. A cavernous space filled with forgotten furniture, boxes, and shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air was stifling, pressing against me like a heavy blanket. Then I saw her, Grandma. She stood in the far corner, half hidden behind an old wardrobe. Her head was tilted unnaturally to one side, her stringy white hair obscuring part of her face. The rest of her looked wrong. Her dress hung off her frame as if her body had shriveled beneath it, her limbs twisted at odd angles. But her eyes, those were the worst part. They were open now, milky and unseeing, yet somehow they bore into me with a chilling intensity. "Grandma," I croaked, my voice barely audible. Her mouth twitched. Then, slowly, impossibly, she smiled. "You shouldn't have come, Danny," she said, her voice warped, echoing strangely in the confined space. Her lips moved out of sync with the words, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen hands. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing on the stairs. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering as if it were struggling against whatever was in this room. When it steadied, she was closer. Too close. Her feet didn't move. She just was. "Leave," she hissed, the word rattling in her throat like broken glass. "Before it finds you." "Before what finds me?" I asked, my voice cracking. I was shaking so hard now I could barely hold the flashlight steady. Her head jerked violently to the side, her neck cracking audibly. "It's already here." And then, with a guttural screech, she lunged at me. I stumbled backward, the flashlight flying from my hand and clattering to the floor. Grandma, or whatever it was, moved with an unnatural speed, her twisted limbs snapping like dry branches as she scrambled toward me. Her fingers, long and claw-like, reached for my face, her milky eyes wide and unblinking. "Get away!" I screamed, blindly swinging my arms in a panic. My hand connected with something solid, a metal lantern hanging from a rafter. It swung wildly, but the impact knocked her off balance. She crumpled to the ground, her body folding in on itself like a broken marionette. For a moment, everything went still except for my ragged breathing. But then she started to rise. Her body moved jerkily, like a wind-up toy running out of tension, her head snapping toward me as she twisted upright. Her mouth gaped open in an unnatural, soundless scream, and that smell, the coppery metallic stench, intensified until it was choking me. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I turned and bolted down the attic stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. The house seemed darker now, the shadows longer and deeper, as if they were alive. My heart pounded as I raced down the hallway toward the front door. But when I reached for the handle, the door wouldn't budge. It felt like it had been welded shut, the knob icy cold under my palm. I pulled and yanked, but it didn't give an inch. Behind me, I heard it again, the shuffle of bare feet on the hardwood floor. "Danny," her voice crooned, soft and sing-song. "Don't you want to stay with Grandma?" I turned slowly, pressing my back against the door. She stood at the end of the hallway, her head tilted to one side, her smile impossibly wide. Her arms dangled at her sides, her fingers twitching as though eager to grab me. But she wasn't alone. Something loomed behind her, a towering, shadowy figure with no discernible features, just a vague humanoid shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its presence was oppressive, suffocating, and as it moved closer, I felt an overwhelming urge to collapse and let it take me. "Run," Grandma whispered, her voice cracking, her smile fading. For a fleeting second, her face softened, as if the real her was trying to surface. "Run now, Danny." Her body convulsed violently, her limbs snapping back into unnatural angles as the shadow wrapped around her like a second skin. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran, my legs moving on pure instinct as the house seemed to twist around me. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the doors on either side blurring together. The air was thick now, heavy like molasses, making every breath a struggle. Behind me, the sound of her uneven footsteps, fast, impossibly fast, grew louder. "Danny," her voice echoed, now layered with something deeper, more guttural. "Don't run from me." My hand caught the edge of the kitchen door frame, and I pulled myself through, slamming the door shut behind me. I braced myself against it, my chest heaving, as I listened for her. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came the knock. Soft at first, like a polite tap, before it turned into a frantic pounding. The wood shuddered under the force. "Danny," she crooned from the other side, her voice now sing-song again. "You always loved my cookies, didn't you? Stay, and I'll bake some for you." My eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for something, anything, to protect myself. A knife? A rolling pin? The room was a blur, panic clouding my thoughts. Then I saw it. The basement door, slightly ajar, its darkness yawning like an open mouth. I hesitated. The basement had always terrified me as a kid. Grandma used to tell me stories about the things that lived down there, the ones that came out when the lights were off. It was silly, childish even, but the thought of going down there made my stomach churn. Still, I didn't have a choice. The kitchen door cracked behind me, the wood splintering. I yanked the basement door open and slipped inside, pulling it shut just as the kitchen door gave way. I plunged into the darkness, feeling my way down the stairs. The air was colder here, damp and earthy. My fingers searched for a light switch, but all I found was the bare, rough surface of the wall. A sudden crash from above made me freeze. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the kitchen, deliberate and unhurried now. She was searching for me. "Danny." Her voice was closer, muffled but still chilling. "You can't hide from me." I stumbled down the last few steps, the old wood groaning under my weight. My foot landed in something wet and sticky, and I nearly slipped. The smell hit me immediately, coppery, thick, suffocating. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth. And then I saw it. In the faint light seeping through the cracks of the basement door, I could make out shapes. Boxes, old furniture, and something else. In the far corner, just beyond the reach of the light, was a pile. Small, human-like shapes, too small to be adults. My stomach turned as the realization hit me. They were children. Their pale, lifeless faces stared back at me, their empty eyes reflecting the faint glow of the dim light. Some of them were decades old, their features shriveled and decayed, while others looked disturbingly fresh. A chill ran through me as I noticed their mouths. Every one of them was sewn shut. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and her silhouette appeared, outlined by the faint light from the kitchen. "Why didn't you stay upstairs, Danny?" she asked, her voice no longer sing-song but dripping with malice. "Now you've seen it." Behind her, the shadow moved again, spreading out like smoke, curling down the stairs toward me. The shadow slithered down the stairs like living ink, stretching out tendrils that writhed and twisted in the air. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to move, but the suffocating presence of that thing rooted me in place. The air grew colder, and my breath came out in frantic, visible gasps. "Why, Danny?" Grandma said, her voice fractured and distorted. She stepped slowly down the stairs, her limbs moving unnaturally, as if her joints had been reassembled backward. "You weren't supposed to see. You weren't supposed to know." The shadow oozed closer, and as it reached the bottom step, it began to spread across the basement floor, pooling around the feet of the children's bodies. Their small forms twitched and jerked, their heads lolling to one side like broken dolls. "No," I whispered, backing away until my shoulder hit the cold, damp wall. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. There had to be a window, a door, something. But there was nothing. Just me, the shadows, and her. "You're part of this now," she said, her voice rising to a sickeningly sweet pitch. "Family stays together, Danny. Forever." Her face was almost unrecognizable now, a grotesque parody of itself. Her jaw hung lower than it should have, her eyes glimmering with malice. She reached for me, her fingers claw-like. The skin on her hands stretched too tight, threatening to tear. I didn't think. I just grabbed the nearest thing I could find. My hand landed on an old rusted pipe lying on the ground, cold and slick with moisture. I swung it wildly as she lunged for me. The pipe connected with her arm, and there was a sickening crack. She recoiled, but not like a human would. Her body contorted, twisting and folding in on itself. Her face split into a horrifying grin, as though the pain meant nothing to her. "You can't fight this, Danny," she hissed. "He won't let you." The shadow reared up behind her, now taking shape. Its body long and sinewy, its arms impossibly thin and stretched. Its head was a void. No eyes, no mouth, just an empty abyss that seemed to pull the light from the room. I swung the pipe again, this time striking the base of the staircase. The wood splintered, and the structure groaned under its weight. The shadow paused, its tendrils hesitating, as if it could sense my plan. Without thinking, I swung again and again, smashing the staircase until it gave way. The top half collapsed, the sound reverberating through the basement. The shadow pulled back, momentarily retreating, and Grandma let out a guttural scream that didn't sound human. I seized the moment, diving toward a faint glimmer of moonlight coming from a high, narrow window. My hands fumbled at the latch, and I threw myself against the glass, shattering it. The jagged edges tore at my clothes and skin as I scrambled through, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I hit the frozen ground outside, rolling onto my side. Blood dripped from cuts on my hands and arms, but I didn't stop. I ran, through the snow, past the skeletal trees, my breath ragged and sharp in the icy air. Behind me, the house seemed to groan, its silhouette dark and menacing against the night sky. For a moment, I thought I heard her voice, faint and distant, calling after me. "Danny, don't leave me." I didn't stop running until my legs burned and the woods blurred together in the moonlight. My lungs felt like they might burst, the icy air stabbing with every breath. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was away from that house. Eventually, the forest thinned, and I stumbled onto the gravel road where the bus had dropped me off earlier that day. The world felt wrong now, tilted somehow, like the house had warped reality around it. My cuts stung in the freezing wind, and every part of me ached, but I didn't dare slow down. The snow-covered road stretched endlessly in both directions. There was no sign of headlights, no sound of engines, just the whisper of the wind and the crunch of my boots on the frost-covered ground. "Help!" I yelled into the emptiness, my voice hoarse. "Somebody, please." Only silence answered. I kept moving, my thoughts racing. What had I just seen? That shadow, those children in the basement, Grandma. She wasn't my grandma anymore, or maybe she hadn't been for a long time. I thought of all the years she'd spent alone in that house, all the strange stories she'd told about things that lurked in the dark. Was it always there, waiting for me? The thought made me shudder. I didn't want to think about it. I just needed to get to safety, find someone, and call for help. But then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, distant, barely audible over the crunch of snow beneath my boots. But they grew louder, steadier, until they matched my pace. I froze, spinning around. The road behind me was empty, stretching into darkness. No movement, no figures, just the endless expanse of snow. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled me now, coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "You can't leave, Danny," a voice whispered, so close it could have been right in my ear. I stumbled back, tripping over a patch of ice and landing hard on the road. My breath puffed in panicked bursts as I scanned the darkness. The voice was hers, Grandma's, but distorted, layered with something deeper, something ancient. "You'll come back," she said. "You belong to him now. Stay away from me." I screamed, scrambling to my feet, but the shadows were moving now, shifting along the tree line. The outline of the figure, tall, spindly, featureless, emerged from the woods. Its long, thin arms stretched unnaturally, its head tilting as if curious about my terror. Behind it, I saw other shapes moving. Smaller ones. The children from the basement. I ran. The road twisted and turned, and I felt like I was going in circles. My muscles screamed in protest, but the thought of stopping was unthinkable. Then, finally, I saw it. A pair of headlights cresting the hill ahead, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Car. I waved my arms frantically, stumbling into the middle of the road. The vehicle slowed, its tires crunching against the snow. A man leaned out of the driver's side window, his face weathered and concerned. "Are you okay, kid?" he called out. "No," I gasped, my voice shaking. "You have to get me out of here. Please, just go, drive." The man hesitated, his brow furrowing. "What happened?" "Just drive," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. He must have seen the desperation in my eyes, because he didn't ask again. He threw the car into reverse, opening the passenger door for me. I climbed in, slamming the door behind me, and the car roared forward. I didn't look back, couldn't, but as we sped down the road, I swore I felt it, that oppressive, suffocating presence, lingering just outside the car, watching, waiting. The driver kept glancing at me as we sped down the road, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. I must have looked like a wreck. Cuts on my hands, blood on my clothes, my breath still ragged and shallow. "You're gonna have to tell me what's going on, kid," he said. "You in some kind of trouble?" I shook my head, struggling to find the words. What could I say? That my dead grandmother had chased me out of her house with a living shadow and a basement full of corpses? He'd think I was insane. Hell, I wasn't even sure I wasn't. I just need to get to town, I managed, my voice trembling. "Please." He nodded, pressing harder on the gas. "You got it. There's a diner about 5 miles ahead. It's open all night. We'll call someone when we get there." I sank into the seat, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, leaving me shaking and hollow. My mind replayed the events of the night, over and over, but every time I tried to make sense of it, the pieces slipped through my fingers like smoke. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, cutting through the darkness. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, the flakes swirling in the beams. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, the only sound besides the hum of the engine. Then the lights flickered. It was brief, just a split second, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I sat up, gripping the edge of the seat. "You see that?" I asked, my voice sharp. The driver frowned. "Probably just a loose connection. Happens sometimes out here." The lights flickered again, longer this time. The engine sputtered, and the car slowed. "No," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. "No, no, no." The car came to a halt, the headlights cutting out entirely. We were plunged into darkness, the snow outside falling heavier now, muffling everything. "Damn it," the driver muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The engine wheezed but didn't catch. "Just give me a second. Probably the battery." "Start the car," I hissed, glancing out the window. The trees along the roadside looked like looming shadows, their gnarled branches reaching for the sky. "I'm trying, kid," he snapped. "Relax. We're fine." But we weren't. The oppressive feeling returned, creeping in like an invisible fog. The air in the car grew cold, unnaturally cold. My breath fogged up the windows as my heart pounded in my chest. And then I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, barely visible through the swirling snow, stood the figure. The shadowy, featureless form that had chased me from the house. Its arms stretched impossibly long, its head tilting as though it were studying us. "Drive!" I screamed. "We have to go. It's here." The driver followed my gaze, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" The thing moved. Not like a person, there was no stride, no gait. It glided toward us, its shape shifting and flickering as if it were made of smoke. Behind it, more figures emerged from the trees. The children, their small forms staggering forward like broken puppets, their mouths still sewn shut. The driver didn't wait. He turned the key again, slamming his fist on the dashboard. The car sputtered, then roared to life. The headlights flared, illuminating the road and the figures. They were closer now, impossibly close, their milky eyes staring directly at us. "Go!" I screamed, and this time he didn't hesitate. The car lurched forward, tires skidding on the icy road. The figures vanished into the darkness as we sped away, but the oppressive feeling remained, clinging to me like a second skin. I didn't dare look back. Couldn't. The diner appeared like a beacon through the snowstorm, its neon sign flickering faintly. The driver pulled into the lot, and I jumped out before the car had fully stopped, stumbling toward the door. The warmth and light hit me like a wave, but it did little to calm the tremors racking my body. "Kid?" The driver called after me, but I didn't turn around. I just sank into the nearest booth, my head in my hands, as the reality of what I'd escaped began to sink in. But then, as I sat there, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I hadn't escaped at all? That night, I stayed at the diner until the sheriff arrived. I told him everything, well, most of it. The house, Grandma, the things in the basement. He didn't believe me, of course, but when he sent someone to check the property, they found nothing. No bodies, no shadow, no sign of my grandmother. The house had been empty for years. I left town the next day, vowing never to return. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I catch glimpses of movement in the shadows, hear faint whispers that sound like her voice. And I know, deep down, that whatever was in that house hasn't forgotten me. It's just waiting,